Hello, everybody. It is so nice to have all of you here. We will be getting started. We have a wonderful guest speaker with us here today. We have Calvin Zheng, who is a Vancouver-based designer, and he owns his own small design agency. And without further ado, Calvin, I'd like to hand it over to you. Let's get started with this.
Great. Thanks, Nabiha, and thanks to
Mhm.
the rest of the team for setting this up and getting everything organized. There was once upon a time when I was also a student and took part in some hackathons, also, and having known some friends who are on the organizing committees, these things are not very easy to organize and run. So, big props to everyone on the organizing team for getting this event together. I know it's a lot of work. To the rest of you, thank you for coming to my talk. And hopefully, all of you will walk away from this today with something to think about. And yeah, I won't spend too long on introductions. I think we only have about an hour, so I want to leave some time for Q&A at the end. So yeah, welcome to my talk, Finding Your Career in Design. My name is Calvin, as mentioned before. I live in Vancouver, BC, up in Canada. So, I'm sure based on what might be in the news lately, you probably know what country I am from. Uh, I currently work on, I guess, my own small design agency. And by small, it is very small. Like I am, quite literally the only employee in this agency. But occasionally I will enlist the help of some friends. So I guess sometimes I will subcontract my work out to other people, which means I do happen to pay people a very small salary, I guess, for work they do for me. Today's talk is about, I guess, careers, and it's probably safe to assume that for the few of you that are here, the career that you're trying to build is something you're thinking about, right? Like hackathons are something you go to when uh, it's a great way to work on stuff, meet people, and maybe find yourself a little bit. So this is not like a motivational talk at all, right? Like I am not here to try to sell you like a dream of how to find a job in design and buy a Lamborghini and live in the Hollywood Hills. I think this is not really how to get a job, right? How to get a job is uh, very specific to everyone's own situations, and I don't think anyone in 1 hour can truly give you the secrets to the universe of how to do that. And to be fair, those don't exist in the first place. So really, it's just more like me talking to you guys about maybe a few things I wish I would have known or maybe would have thought about when I was earlier on in my career, right? Things that I think about now that I wish I might have done differently or had a different perspective on. So usually for talks that I listen to at events, a lot of the times the problem is, they're very inspirational, right? Like they always leave you with the feeling of, oh yeah, like this makes a lot of sense. I'm going to make these big changes in my life and turn it all around. But I think the problem with a lot of those talks is that uh, while they're very inspirational, they usually don't leave you with a very solid plan of action, right? Or the plan of action is pretty vague and pretty general, like, yeah, if you just find a job, your life will turn around. But finding that job is, maybe a few hundred other steps in between. So, what I do hope is for anything that you hear today, I don't expect that anyone here will internalize it and make it the highlight of this weekend. But I hope that, maybe in a few months, a few years, some nugget of knowledge from this talk will sort of appear in your brain and remind you of something. And if that happens, please let me know. Reach out to me. I would love to know if this, uh, I guess, touched your heart or in some way, maybe like 5 years down the line. But without further ado, let's get into it, starting with part one. The blueprint doesn't fit. So I think if you're in this hackathon or if you've sort of dipped your toes into the world of design, UX design, uh, there's probably some sort of career progression that you've seen, right? Whether that's hey, you should intern at these companies You should work here as a new grad. You should aim to, work at a FANG, work at a startup. These are the best startups to work at right now. These are companies with the greatest design culture. And I think what ends up happening is uh, there's this cycle, right, of you are trying to figure things out. And earlier on in your career, of course, you don't know what to do and you don't know what anything is. And um, as you learn more, it might feel like you end up knowing even less because you uncover new things to learn, new things that you haven't experienced before. And it can very much, I think, feel like this endless cycle of figuring it out because, the more you know, the more you don't know. Um, I'm still figuring it out, right? Like, I think I am just at a point in my life where I've figured it out a little more than maybe some of you have in this call. But, rest assured, I'm still trying to figure it out. I'm just figuring out different things at this stage in my life. And I think part of the reason is, LinkedIn is the devil, right? Like in this case. I have no idea why anyone, including me, has the app on their phone because uh, whereas I think with, if you scroll through social media, you at least get some small form of like dopamine hit, right, from the TikToks or Instagram reels that you scroll through. But uh, I don't know. I don't know about you, but whenever I scroll through LinkedIn, I always feel a little bit bad about myself, right? Because it's always, hey, I started this amazing new job or position, or maybe something more relevant to everyone here is, hey, I just started, or I am proud to announce that I am, an incoming whatever design intern, right, for some big company here for summer. What year is it? Summer 2025, and I think the problem with LinkedIn is everyone is there to post sort of their highlight reels, but no one there is really going to talk about, right, the process or the things that they had to do, right, to get to maybe where they are. And I think because LinkedIn is such a, here are the best moments of my career kind of place, we maybe tend to have some sort of idea that, the ideal career progression looks something like, you land some internship, right, and you land some new grad role, and eventually you get promoted and you get to senior, and then after you get from senior, you go from senior to like lead or principal or director or whatever, right? And uh, you can, and people are like, hey, you gotta, do this in a FANG, or here are some like great companies and startups that are worth billions and, would be great for your career. And if, those don't work out, hey, these are other ideal companies, right, that you should work for. So to sum it up, right, it is a lot of expectations that we put on ourselves, but I think a lot of the times it's also maybe influenced, right, by what you see. Um, we all probably know better when we think about it that there are more companies in the world that exist than the ones that I've shown here, right? That there are companies that, some of us have maybe never heard of that are doing very cool, very interesting things that need good designers. They're just not the loudest or the most colorful or the most I don't know, sexy, right, to put on your resume. Um, and I think, that moves us on to the next part, right? Like what what's sort of expected, like the expectations that are placed upon us when it comes to our careers. And I feel like everyone has probably searched for, hey, I would how do I interview? Like, what would it be like to interview at Meta or Google, or like, what does this app critique interview mean? What are some portfolio things that I can learn, or like, what are other people doing, or what's knowledge that I need to collect? And um, I, was Medium is this website that still exists, right? But 10 years ago, when I started to get into UX design, there were already like hundreds of these articles that existed. Back then, AI was not a thing. So AI generated articles weren't, everywhere on the internet. So now I can't imagine that if you're starting your career in design now and you Google some of these questions, that alongside, the articles that people write, there are probably also, articles with these very urgent sounding headlines also written by AI telling you like you need to learn this or you need to learn that. And apparently everything is the most important thing that you can learn for your career. And I think that's just, if you think about it, a little crazy, right? Like you can't possibly do that. Um, Here are like just some of the things that I've been asked or told or like asked myself or worried about. And like these are just 10 things, right? Like I'm sure if I really sat down and think about it, um, there are more. And I think by writing it down and really looking through this myself, like it's sort of funny to hear that some of these things still exist. For example, number four, 10 years ago, I heard, hey, you know, as a UX designer, the one way to find success in your career is you need to learn how to code, right? And people gave their reasonings for that. And I feel like that's still a statement that people make nowadays, right? Like it's been 10 years. And obviously, I haven't in that 10 years learned to code and became a programmer, right? Like I'm still very much a UX designer. And I don't think me not knowing how to code has uh, really impacted my career negatively uh, at all, right? I think a lot of it is maybe just FOMO. A lot of it is, hey, I don't know what I need to be doing, so I'm going to look to other people or other resources for that. But when there are just so many resources and voices, it's really, really hard to, you know, also say to yourself that what you are learning or doing at the moment is enough, right? And I think we don't really say that enough, which is that what you're doing at the moment is enough, right? You're doing something, and that is way better than doing nothing. And it is okay that you don't know absolutely everything about design, because uh, if you did, then you probably wouldn't need to come to a talk called Finding Your Career in Design. Um, I think there are a few things, though, that you can think about and maybe flip the expectations on. And I think one of them is, you hear, hey, you need to present your best work, right? You need to do good work. Your work should be polished. Uh, perfectionism is a word that gets thrown around a lot, I think, in design. But I think, more importantly, right, the process, right, and actually learning something from what you're doing is more important than presenting perfectly polished work. Because I think when you start working, you then realize that no work can truly be perfect, because nothing sort of just stops at any place in time, right? Things are always moving, things are always, in other places making progress, and your work will have to evolve with it. So if you're chasing perfection, it's not going to happen because things always change. So you might as well make that process of making the changes and doing the work the thing that you reward yourself with. And the next thing is, you'll hear, hey, in design, there are many different types of roles, right? There's UX research, there's UX design, like UI design. If you want to be a motion designer, right, that's a thing. Um, I don't know. I feel like, again, I'm also still figuring it out. I can't really say that I figured out my role. Um, Sometimes, like, I'm an accountant, right? Because now that I run my own thing, I have to do my own accounting, and I'm not a very good accountant, right? But I wouldn't say that's my role, even though that's sometimes the work I do for a whole day. Um, I think early on, it's really hard to exactly know like what role, really aligns with what you even like. And sometimes you can do a role early on and then realize later, hey, like I don't like this as much. Um, I think a good example is even just myself, where when I started to look for opportunities in UX design, I closed myself off from a lot of opportunities that were, saying, hey, visual or strong visual design skills preferred, right? And I thought to myself, um, I know my peers, right? Like I can see their work. They are much better visual designers than I am. I'll never become a visual designer. And uh, I didn't apply for any of those roles, but as I started doing more internships, I naturally just had to take on the role of a visual designer in some cases, right? And it turns out it's not that bad. Like you don't have to be great at it, but it's not the hardest thing in the world to learn. And I think by locking yourself early into, what you think you should be doing, it really does, I think, close yourself off to some cooler opportunities out there, right? And you might be able to do things that you never uh, thought were even possible. So in the third part of this, right, figuring out your role is sort of locking yourself into doing something. I think chasing titles, uh, senior director, whatever. Uh, I think titles are, let me just say now, right? Titles are sort of meaningless. They exist in different companies and they mean a different thing at every company, right? Like you could be a director level person at a startup, but if you move to like an Amazon, right, you probably end up just being a senior because there's way more people and it's a lot harder to climb the ladder. And uh, I feel like everyone thinks about climbing the ladder and it's just this big, long, like daunting climb, right? And I think uh, the titles themselves don't really mean anything in the sense that like there are very good junior designers and there are also very useless senior designers out there, right? Like there's no uh, guarantee that because you hold a certain title that you are in fact as competent as your title suggests. So really the theme of the talk is here, right? It's defining like what your own version of success looks like for your own career. And the last point here is, instead of thinking about the fact that you work at a company, I think it's better to think of it as you're working with people, right? Because you may not be working at a company. Again, I didn't think I would be doing my own freelance thing, but here I am, right? And for some of you, this might be the case too. Um, More often than not, right, companies are pretty soulless. Companies don't really have a face. Companies themselves don't actually have your best interests at heart. Um, but I think people do, right? And obviously, people exist to work in companies. Um, but when you leave a company, the people that you meet, right, they stay with you. And I think it's important to know that no matter what work it is you're doing or what you end up doing in terms of position or whatnot for your career, that the people you work with will tend to remember you, right? Like for better or for worse, and hopefully, right, it's for better. And the like people talk about networking, and I think the image of networking is maybe, hey, I'm gonna go into this room with a lot of tables and there's a bunch of people from the industry that I can talk to, right? And hopefully I can get their LinkedIn and they'll give me a referral. um, I don't really do that. I don't like doing that. Like it makes me feel awkward, but I still think I network in the way that uh, I try to treat people I work with well. I try to keep in touch with them, right? I try to ask what I can do to help them. And uh, this means that, there are much better designers than me out there, I'm sure, right? Like in terms of technical skill, experience, whatever. But I think people tend to underestimate the, amount of value that it has when someone has like the trust to pick you instead of someone else, right? Like to them, the trust is worth something, right? They know you, they know your work, they know that you can be relied on. And I think companies don't make that decision, but individual people do. And I think if anything, right, if anything, like if nothing from this talk stays with you, I think this should, right, which is no matter what, no matter where you go, always think about the people that you're working with. Like those are the people that you never know if they can actually make or break a career for you in the future. So let's get to the meat, I guess, of the presentation, which is what does it actually mean, right, to design your own path, or what does it mean to figure out your career path? And we can go over my career, right? Like, who am I? This is sort of what I've done. I did some internships, right? Like, wow, I did design in a startup, and then now I'm doing my own thing. And I think, is this really who I am, right? Like, this is the question that I ask myself a lot. Someone looks at my resume, right? Like, are they really able to piece together a picture of who I am as a person, right? Like, who are you, right? Who are all of you in this room? Like, seriously, who are you? Like, what gets you out of bed? Like, what do you what do your friends know you for, right? Like, what do you hate? Do you like food? Do you like coffee? Like, what are you interested in? Do you even like design, right? Like, I think a lot of the times, uh, like, come on, you'll see titles like X Microsoft, X Google, X Facebook. Um, but like, if you talk to someone in person, are they really going to introduce themselves that way? Like, when was the last time you shook someone's hand and they were like, "Hey, my name is Mark. I used to work at Facebook," and you're like, "Oh, that's weird. Where do you work now? Like, why does where you used to work play such a big role in your identity?" So I think because we're all so just focused, right, on this is good for my career or this is bad for my career, that uh, how you present yourself sort of strips itself of some individuality, right? Like, beneath the work that you're doing, you're still a person. You're still a person with your own ideas, your own thoughts, your own interests. And uh, I think it's important to remember that, right? Especially when you are trying to go through the system of, uh, you know, finding a job in this faceless company that you're applying to. Like, beyond the work, right? Who are you? And I think this actually does influence your work and your career a lot more than you might think. Like, for now as a student, it makes sense that, hey, you can spend 100% of your time on both school and your career, right? Or just trying to build a career. But um, as you get older, right, things happen, life happens. Right? Your work cannot possibly define who you are as an individual unless you plan on spending your entire life at work. And so I think part of this really is just redefining success. Like, what does success mean to you, right? Like, beyond just the job title, beyond the company name, uh, right? Like, you only see the value in it because you place the value in it, right? Like, if someone doesn't know, what Google is, and you tell them you work at Google, does that, like, will they think you're successful? They probably don't know what that is, right? Like, they have no idea. Like, you don't want to always be walking around with sort of this, yes, I've made it face, but deep down, you know that you can't really leave the job that you love or you love so much because you're in golden handcuffs, right? And I think it's fine to, not be at the top tier anything, right? Like, it's fine to not have this sort of storybook fairy tale career progression, um, because, first of all, that's not realistic. But second of all, there is a lot of work to be done elsewhere that's sometimes just as interesting, if not more interesting, with, equally smart, if not smarter people, right? Like, companies you've never heard of that make things, like, as UX designers, right? Like, everyone's like, oh, I want to change the world. I want to do good work. I want to do work that impacts people in a positive way. But, you know, would you work on, I don't know, like solar power batteries for homes? Like, that's something that positively impacts people, right? But, I think that doesn't fall into the category of like, this is a sexy problem to solve, right? Or this isn't something that produces sexy design. And as a result, it might be seen as, lower value work, even if it isn't. And I want everyone here to just know that, like, good work is good work, right? Like, you should be proud of it regardless of the name that's associated with it. So, like, to redefine success, right? Like, there are a few, I don't know, like, guidelines that I have, which is like, you can get specific. I'm not saying that you can't say, oh, working at Google is my definition of success. I think you can get very specific with what you want, but the important thing to remember is, like, your definition can and probably will change over time, right? And this goes back to the whole figuring it out thing, where, as someone who's reasonable, yes, of course you can change your opinion when you learn more things, right? When you learn different perspectives, you learn more facts. Your definition of success can change, and the most correct definition is your own, right? Like, no one else can tell you what is successful. I guess the usually in brackets is like, please don't uh, turn to crime, right? Like there are certain things where you can succeed at them, but the outcomes are not, legal or moral or whatever. And I'm not going to go into that. But um, yeah, besides that, like do the things that you want to do, like go to hackathons, right? Like thank you all for being here. You can work on small personal projects. You can uh, I think it's important to place emphasis on the small part, right? Which is a lot of the times these portfolios and UX projects, they end up right. You never finish them. You never want to finish them. Like they start off too big, and when you start, you realize how big it is and how much work it is, and it's hard to get it finished, let alone get started. So I think it's important to do things that you can finish or do things that you can achieve, right? Like start working on things in small steps. And I think a lot of the best ideas are also the ones that are, you know, small and simple, right? Um, you can do things like take on a freelance job. And uh, I want to say here that freelance job in this context does not necessarily mean like it has to be a UX design freelance job. Um, I think my earliest freelance work was like PowerPoint decks, I think, for venture capitalists. Essentially, some companies they want to raise investment, right, and they need a slide deck, and CEOs and engineers are generally not very good at making good-looking slide decks. So they're like, "Hey, can you make this slide deck for us?" And it was a decent gig, right? And this is something that is a freelance job, is a design job. It's not necessarily a UX job, but at the very least, right, it taught me that yes, there is definitely money in making PowerPoints for people, but personally, I would not want to do this job, right, for the rest of my life. So it was fun to do it and try it out, but it's not for me. Um, work with people you like. Work on something that's not UX related, right? And I think this is also important because there are only so many weather apps and calendar apps and like UX projects that uh, you personally can do before going insane. I think as a creative in a creative field, it is important to do creative things that are outside of what you do for work. Um, if you've ever worked a whole day and then sat down and you're like, I got to work on my portfolio, it's so hard to actually work on your portfolio because you've been doing design work for the whole day and now you got to do it for free. So work on something that's not UX related. Um, like one of the examples I can give is one of my personal projects, right, from back when I was a student. And I still have it on my portfolio because to me, this is actually a very like a special project, I guess. And uh, short summary of this, I did some design every day for a year and I like posted it on my Instagram for a year. And I think the motivation behind this was back then, I was also sort of stuck, right? Like I had no good portfolio, but I needed to apply for internships. And I didn't really want to work on like a UX project because I had no idea what I was doing. And I thought, like, well, I don't really know how to use these tools that well either. So I'm gonna just make something, right? Like, and just post it and see if see if I get better, right? And I think this is a very important project because it has in many interviews, I guess, back when I was applying for internships, started conversations where yes, like this is obviously not a UX project, right? Like at best, it is a graphic design project. But I think the premise of the project was just really interesting or different to a lot of the interviewers. And that was enough, right, to get a conversation and get my foot in the door. And I think, the part four question of like, yeah, like everything you said is great, right? Like, does it work? Right? Like, are you just sort of the one survivor that ended up doing okay? Like, is this advice applicable to everyone? Um, I mean, I think if you look back right at this career thing I showed earlier, and you really dove into it, right? Like I can show you almost all the places where you know if you were gonna actually zoom in and look at it, you would think like, wow, what a shit show, right? Like everything here sort of sucks. So like if you break it down, like the 2 years where I was doing internships, yeah, like of course, multiple rejections, right? Late nights, personal projects, go home after the internship to work on your portfolio because your internship ends in like 3 months and you gotta find another internship after that one, right? And there's no break. And from here, like a lot of different projects, different internships meant that I wasn't sure exactly what my interests were. Like I was doing a bunch of different things. Like even one internship was like, hey, you should do like motion design for the summer. And I was like, sure, I guess. Like, so I spent that summer in After Effects instead of Figma. Um, but I would say that, I look back at this time fondly because as students or as early career people, you have the very big advantage of nobody expects anything from you. And it's really weird because as soon as you graduate and you look for a new grad role, you're suddenly supposed to know things or know how to do your job. But as an intern, people treat you like babies. And I think as a baby, you should really take advantage of that because it means, all the opportunities are open for you. You're allowed to make mistakes. People are actually interested in you. Um, right? Like companies hiring interns, it's fun, right? Like people like having interns around. They're very temporary. You're very low risk, right? Like you can get away with a lot. And I think I wish maybe I did that a bit more back then. And you know, moving on to my first job out of school, like wow, great, first job out of school. This is like a cool startup. And because it's a startup, like where's the user research? Like what did I learn in school and all my other places that told me the process was important? Um, right. With a startup, like, do I have a manager? Like, did we hire this person to be my manager and now they're not my manager? And it's like, hey, I haven't gotten a raise or a promotion in like the 3 years I've been here. And then, oh, hey, there's like internal company problems that meant that we had to stop all new product work. And now I'm doing like uh, I guess I don't know, like internal tool stuff for next year. Um, and hey, after you did all that, let's lay a bunch of people off, including you, by the way, without any warning, and just let's get you in the call on Monday morning and tell you that you lost your job. So uh, of course, right? Like if I was to, I posted on LinkedIn after this to be like, hey, everyone, like I'm looking for a new role. Like, wow, I had the best time at this company. Thanks so much. And obviously, I can't write everything I'm saying here on LinkedIn, but this is going on YouTube, so I hope it doesn't go viral. Uh, but again, the point is, right? Like, yes, I had a good time overall at this company, right? Like, I definitely met some people that I still talk to and are very helpful to me now. Um, but at the end of the day, like work is work, right? Like work sort of sucks sometimes. Like I would say that, maybe half the time at this company, I was like putting out a fire or something, but I learned a lot, right? And I think again, on paper, it probably looks like I did this startup thing and I left, at the right time on my own terms or whatever, and then I moved on to better things. And like, yes, in summary, that is true, but uh, the process of doing so was not the most painless process, right? And we move on, right, to after I got laid off, and I was like, well, what do I do now, right? So look for a new job, obviously. So I found another new job at a B2B SaaS startup, and then after working there for a few months, they couldn't raise their next round of fundraising. So they were like, "Hey, I'm so sorry. Like we hired you 3 months ago, but we're gonna have to let you go again." So I was like, "Well, cool. That's great. I have bills to pay, so I'm gonna find another job." And I found another job at another startup, and they also couldn't raise their fundraising round like 3 months in, and they're like, "Hey, everyone, sorry, like we gotta lay everyone off." And uh, during this time, right, during the whole startup shuffle, I sort of deep down knew like this wasn't gonna be stable at all. So hey, I should start doing some freelance on the side just to make sure that like if and when shit hits the fan, right, I'm not left holding the bag. And so that's how I started doing like small one-off projects for freelance clients. And uh, question of, hey, where did you find these clients from, right? Like there's something sketchy about that. Like no one just has freelance clients that are just ready to go in their pockets, right? And uh, going back to what I said about people being very important in your career, a lot of these were me asking around for favors, right? Just being like, hey, um, I'm free, I have time. Do you know anyone, or do you need any like design help? And uh, that really that really got me through this period of instability, I guess. And I think, I mean, I know last year was just a weird year in general, but yeah, these are like the most memorable interviews I've had for all the like wrong reasons, right? Where uh, the other side of it, where you're no longer a baby and everyone's gonna treat you like an adult, but they don't treat you like a normal adult. They treat you like an adult on like a dating app where they just sort of ghost you after talking to you a few times, and you have to figure it out. So, um, right, that is not a very fun year on paper, but I'm glad I did it, right? Because it led me here, where I'm like, I don't want to have my destiny, right, like determined by a company. I don't want, my livelihood, right, to be uh, based on whether or not a recruiter remembers to email me back, or whether or not like I'm better than the other guy in an interview, right? And I think, um, of course, like I could have stayed still and kept interviewing, but for me personally, I was like, I can't do that. Like I have to work on something. Uh, I gotta move forward, and now, right, I have doing my own thing. Like I have to do my own accounting, manage deadlines. Like it's all new stuff. Where now I'm like taking on the role of like a PM, also, I guess in some cases. Um, and it's not perfect, right? Like I'm obviously still figuring it out. Like I don't have an agency website still. Like I promise I'll put that up this year, so that next year if I'm invited to talk at something, I'll have a website for it. But um, that like doesn't really matter, because like no one knows this, right? Like I'm not talking about this on social media or on a daily basis, and only I know how things are going. And like things are fine. Like they're good. So um, and I'm not working at any like name brand thing, and things are fine. And it's a little weird to think about sometimes when you're sort of expected to always be like, oh, go, go, go. Everything's like about the next opportunity. But sometimes it's okay to just enjoy things being fine for a little bit. Um, right? Like there are things I can't write on my LinkedIn, like, working for myself, like the money is pretty good. It's just not very like stable, right? Like you make more one month, you make less one month, but overall it's pretty good. Um, because I can set my own hours, it makes doing like husband things a lot easier. Like my wife is a PhD student, so this means she has like a schedule, right? Like she goes to school on certain days and is gone for certain hours, which means that because I don't need to be at my desk from 9 to 5, I can just do things, right? Like I can work when I need to and do other house things when I need to, and that makes me happier. Um, I can also decide to not take on projects, right? Like if you have a boss, you probably can't do that. Um, Sometimes I can't afford not to do that, but like, I tell myself the choice is there if I need it. And uh, I think one thing I never realized about freelancing is that like I don't really have anything to do like urgently, right? Usually, I don't really have anything to do urgently, but there are like a million things that maybe are due in the near future or in the distance that I should be working on. So it's a constant state of like I'm not busy, but I should be. And then also obviously sometimes I am actually very busy, but uh, that's all part of this new career I picked for myself. So like you guys are designers, want to be designers, so like let's design your career like a designer, right? Like just let's make it clear, like no one is looking out for you. um like people will help you, okay, like but you have to help yourself first. And what I mean by no one is looking out for you is it's very likely that no one is going to be actively 100% of the time thinking about, hey, like, how can I help this other person's career? Everyone has their own career to worry about. Everyone has their own ladder to climb, right? You have to help yourself first. And I think one way you can do this, right, is take this process that you were trained to use and just apply it to your own life, right? Like, you try something out, how did it go, right? Like, think about it, talk about it, make some changes, and try it again. Like, you iterate through you can iterate through like a user flow, right? You can talk to actual users and run user tests and make those changes. But so it should be easier to do it with your own life. Like, you don't have to validate a lot of things in your own life, right? Like, you have no stakeholders except for yourself most of the time, uh, unless you get married. But anyways, yeah, just iterate, right? Iterate your own life in a way that makes sense. Um, if something isn't working, it's probably just you need to change something, or maybe you just don't need to do it at all. Sometimes it's okay to like just not do something. You don't have to do it. You have free will. Um, and like, realistically, right? It should go something like, if you're figuring it out, you continually build on your knowledge, which means that you are uh, unlocking better things to figure out, right? Like, yes, of course, you will constantly be in a state of figuring out your life and your career. But if you figure things out, like the easy things, that's the only way you can open yourself up to figuring out the more challenging, the more fun, the more difficult things. And uh, yeah, I think maybe just two questions to try and figure out right today is, who are you, and like, what makes you happy, right? Like, what do you care about? What do you want to do yourself? Like, what will actually make you get out of bed and want to do the thing that you picked? um, and I think, again, this isn't to say that finding a job is, like, the wrong choice, and that the only way to be happy is to work for yourself. I think, again, finding your own career means that the outcome is not really what you're looking for in terms of like the title or the company or the position, but the outcome should be something that aligns with what's important to yourself. And I think if you can find that, doesn't really matter, right? Like, what's on your resume, as long as you can sustain yourself and make sure that you live a life that makes you happy. I think that's it, right? Like, it's really not that difficult. So, yeah, thanks everyone for listening. Here are my, I guess, like the two socials I'm comfortable giving out here. Um, and yeah, I think we're at time for Q&A, right when the organizer said it should be. So great, we can open it up for Q&A.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Calvin. We really appreciate you taking the time to be here and giving us a look into your work and your field. I really appreciated the memes on the slides as well. I thought that was very nice. Now we're going to be moving into the Q&A session. Feel free to raise your hand and we'll unmute you guys. Or you can also type in the chat and we'll read it out loud.
There's also, I guess, I forgot to mention for my own work what I do, which is obviously I own an agency, but um, I guess I do like UX design for certain clients. So one of my clients is, a company. They make batteries and energy panels, right, for residential and commercial buildings. And essentially, my job there is to uh, work with their hardware engineers and also their software engineers to figure out and design stuff that works well together. So, it's not very public facing or sexy work, but I think in terms of like pure UX work, like that's basically it, right? Like, if you've ever had to explain UX to like a 45-year-old engineer, that's this is that kind of job. And I think it's a lot of fun actually to um, essentially take on like a PM/designer role. some other clients I have, one is like they make like a B2B SaaS API thing, and I think they're still trying to figure out their product market fit. So every time I work with them, they're like, "Hey, this is a new idea we have. Can we make this into like a landing page?" Um, Jennifer's question: how do you promote your freelance services and attract clients? So if I was more on top of things, right, I would have a website, and I would probably, at that point, figure out how to do outreach. But as of currently, I think what I do is rely on word of mouth a lot. So I think word of mouth only really works if the work you do is good, right? Like if the work you do is not good, they're not gonna refer you to their friends or other people. Um, but I think, yeah, so far word of mouth has worked really well, right? Where I think it's not so much you're sitting there and hoping that someone else will tell someone else about you. It's more that you actually have to talk to people and be like, hey, occasionally, do you need any help with design? Do you know anyone that needs help with design? I think that's like the simplest way to do it. And personally, for me right now, like I have enough work where I think if I did more outreach, it wouldn't make sense at the current moment. Clara, any tips on interning as a designer when the client has no prior design experience / knowledge? Uh, yeah, I think this one is a great one, which is to remember that titles are just titles, right? Intern is just intern and title, and you in this case are the subject matter expert, right? Like if your client has no design experience or knowledge, and maybe this is their first time working with a designer, uh, I think that's incredible because you can define that experience for them, right? Like you're their first sort of look right into the world of working with like a UX designer. So I think if your client has no knowledge, they're going to lean on you a lot, right? And I think it's important to be confident in what you do know, but also what you don't know. Where if you don't know something, obviously, like go find that out, tell them that you don't know and that you'll do that. But um, yeah, you know more than you probably think you do. So I would just lean into it and be confident and uh, again, make it so that after they work with you, they're like, wow, that was like the best designer I've ever worked with, even if that was the only one they've ever worked with, right? But you want the impression to be that. How important is the personal practice of design to becoming good / successful designers? Nabiha, could you clarify what that means?
Hi there. Yes, of course, I can clarify. Um, so I'm trying to find where I wrote my question. Yes. So you know how there's design for professional work, and then there's design that you practice on your own as like maybe as a hobby or things that you like to create. Like you did the 365 days of design. That was a personal project, right? That helped you in your professional work. So how would you say how important is that kind of work to maybe, putting yourself out there in the professional world? How does that influence your career, your definition of success?
Yeah. I mean, I think my answer, if you asked me that, right, like a few years ago, would have been, of course, it's very important, right? Like your personal design projects, non UX work, creative work is, very important to becoming a good / successful designer. And I think that opinion maybe has shifted a little bit for me in the last few years. And I think you can be a successful or a good designer without personal projects, but right, there's always a but. Um, but I think it's important to know that like again there are people who are very good at their jobs, but that's it, right? To them it's just a job, and there are people who are very good designers. They have a lot of experience, and maybe sometimes they evolve into the like at the beginning when there was more time and more energy, there was more time devoted to like personal projects, right? But maybe as they progress in their career, right, like more responsibilities, family stuff, life stuff, it's harder and harder to have personal projects, right, to have that continue on. But I think it's again very time dependent in that as maybe you're more experienced and you don't have as much time for some of these smaller personal projects, then it really just becomes a matter of like, how important is that to you, right? Like, I think it's important to see it not as doing these personal side projects will make me a good designer, but it's more so, what am I trying to get out of this personal project that I'm doing, and how does it help me in being a designer, right? Like, for me, it wouldn't make sense for me now to do like the same 365 project that I did years ago, right? Because right, hopefully, right, I'm better at design, right, than I was back in 2016. But I think back then my intention there was, I just want to do a bunch of work and learn these tools, right? And the only way to do that when you don't know these tools is to do a lot of work and do a lot of different small projects. But now, if I was to do a personal project, it would probably be like, oh, I'm gonna make this thing for my friends, like, soccer club or whatever, right? Like, they need a website, web app, icon, whatever. Right? It's sort of fun for me. Or, uh, I want to do this personal branding thing, or I want to do a branding thing for this, like pro bono, whatever, right? Like, for me, if I was to do a personal project now, um, it wouldn't be necessarily to practice like the hard skills, right? Like, of using a tool, but it would be like, hey, I want to just work on this, right? Because I think it's fun, or I think it will, really help this club out or help this other organization, right? Like, I think for me, that helps me in becoming a better designer, because it is at that point like more exposure and more practice to maybe an area of design that I'm not used to, with like relatively low stakes. But it's not like, hey, I do this because, like, if I don't do this, I won't be a good designer. Like, does that make sense?
Yes, that makes a lot of sense. Like the intention behind it counts a lot. Thank you so much for that. We have a couple of more minutes, so everybody put down your questions and we'll try to get through all of them.
Great. Yeah, I'll try my best to get through them too. Cheyenne, how important is the design portfolio at different stages of a designer's career? How might its content evolve over time? Oh, that's a great question. I think early on, it's very important, right? Like, early on, there's no work history you have. There's nothing about you anywhere. You need a portfolio, right? And but I will say, early on, it is okay to have a portfolio that isn't like complete, right? Like, I think the designer portfolio people think of have like 3 to 5 projects, right? Like, very slick, very whatever, very nice, right? Like, very, you look at it and you're like, wow, this is done. But um, I think if you're early on, it's okay. Like, you can just sort of put work on it that you've just finished, right? Like, your most recent projects. And I think it's more important early on to show that you are interested in learning, rather than you are good at everything there is to be good at in design. Um, I think early on, it's very important, right? Your personality is really going to shine here. Where if I was to pick between like 4 interns, right, and they're all at the same skill level, I'd probably pick the one that, I feel like I could work with best, because they happen to show, more of themselves, or about themselves in their portfolio or in their interview. Um, so as you get older in your career, like more experience, I think portfolios tend to have less information from what I've seen, where it's like, oh yeah, I worked on Facebook Messenger, right? Like, no one needs to like check like what Facebook Messenger is. A lot of the times the projects will speak for themselves, but um, I still believe your personality and who you are is important, right? Like, no matter how experienced you are, because at the end of the day, someone has to hire you. They have to feel like they can like you or work with you. Which, to move on to your next question, how do designers and startups typically stay current with trends or new tools as they progress in their career? Um, Honestly, like, I've wondered this too, right? Like, there's no resource or method, or I think a lot of it is just as you work and you do things, right? Like, you will naturally pick up what's happening, right? I think if you're paying some attention to just your day to day, like, you'll definitely see this. So I wouldn't actually worry too much, because especially in startups, you probably don't have too many like resources in terms of people that you can talk to. So you will be doing a lot of this research right on your own. So as a result of doing that work, you'll typically keep up with what's going on. Next question, Ashwana, what are the best job boards? They're all the same. Like, they're all the same. Like you apply, it goes into some automated system. You may or may not hear back. I think the most success I've had is just applying directly on company websites. Like that one, I think not a lot of people talk about. It's a lot more work, but I find that I've gotten better responses to those roles as opposed to like mass applying on LinkedIn or another platform. And also, of course, like if you know someone, obviously it helps. But I would say try the company job like careers page. Usually, for some reason, those seem to work better for me. Um, Last question we have, Regina. Two questions. What advice would you give to someone looking to transition into full-time freelancing in UI design? And if a client rejects a proposed design, what's the best move to handle the situation and move forward? Great questions. Number one, advice for transitioning into full-time freelancing. I think if you have a job, you should probably keep it for the time being as you do the transition. It's always easier to, do the transition slowly, right? Like you probably won't have a full pipeline of projects that will replace your 9 to 5 salary, right? Like if you have a 9 to 5 salary. So I think again, the advice of you can also just dive in and 100% transition, and that totally works out for some people. But for me, I'm more risk averse, right? So I like to, uh, as I said before, right, like try something out. If it doesn't work, make a change and like try it again. And I think the reason I say to keep your job is because like it gives you the security to actually experiment, right? Like you can do things your own way, but in like a smaller way, so it doesn't really affect you that much. And the job gives you security while you figure this freelancing thing out on the side until it grows into something bigger, and then you can turn into it full time. Um, Alternatively, sometimes like you lose your job and your choice is to just transition fully, and you just have to figure it out. But in ideal situations, if you have the choice, I would say keep your job and like figure this thing out on the side. But again, self-discipline, right? Like once you work for a whole day, 9 to 5, like it's very hard to also want to continue working afterwards. And to answer question number two, if a client rejects your proposed design, what's the best way to handle the situation and move forward? Really depends on why they're rejecting it, I think. Uh, I think it's also important to know that sometimes, there are just clients you won't agree with or work well with, and it's like okay to walk away from those projects, right? Like sometimes it's just not productive for both people to continue working together. Um, but I would say generally, if they reject a design, it's always best to ask why, right? There's always a reason behind it. One method that has worked for me that actually saved a client from dropping me was, I kept all the different iterations and explorations I did before I presented the work to them. And they didn't like the work, even though it was pretty close to what they asked for. Uh, but I showed them the previous iterations that I did, and those ones were more, I guess, like more creative, right, more out there. And it turns out that was what they wanted all along. So I would suggest, if working for people, keep all the iterations of your work, right? Like don't just work on one frame and like change it and like delete, like just duplicate it, save it. Like it helps you for explaining your work to people, and also if you want to write a portfolio case study, you have all the iterations that like you made. You don't have to dig through like version history to copy paste the right screens. So yeah, I think that's all the questions, and that's time, right? So yeah, thanks again everyone for being here. I hope once again something from this talk like strikes you a few years later or something. And again, if it does, send me an email or something. It'll make my day. But otherwise, enjoy the rest of your hackathon. And yeah, I hope everyone finds what makes them happy and successful.
Thank you so much, Calvin.